And we're reminding you in front of witnesses. Mom orchestrated from the center of the table like a conductor who'd memorized the score. A nod to Linda. A smile at Tyler. A gentle hand on Dad's arm when he started to speak too soon. She was good. She'd always been good. I used to think my mother was just a warm person who liked hosting. Now I understood she was a project manager with a 20-year track record, and her biggest deliverable was sitting at the end of the table drinking sparkling water. The dessert menus arrived. Aunt Linda ordered crème brûlée without looking at the price. Brooke asked for the chocolate soufflé, which required a 20-minute lead time, which meant she'd ordered it before I sat down. Of course she had. They were running up the tab the way you run up a tab when someone else is paying. Without a ceiling, without guilt, without a single glance at the column on the right side of the menu. My sparkling water was down to the ice. Brooke was the one who cracked the surface. She'd had 3 glasses of the Bordeaux by then, enough to sand down whatever filter she normally kept between her brain and her mouth, which was never especially thick to begin with. She leaned across the table, glass in hand, and grinned at me like we were sharing a joke. "Relax, big sister. It's just dinner. You can afford it." I set my water down. "Afford what?" "This." She gestured at the table. The platters, the wine, the 16-place settings, the crème brûlée and chocolate soufflé currently being prepared by a kitchen that had no idea it was catering a shakedown. "We ordered the good stuff since you're treating." She said it so casually. "Since you're treating." Like it had been settled in a meeting I wasn't invited to. Which, of course, it had been. The table went quiet for about 3 seconds, which doesn't sound long until you're the one sitting in it. Mom shot Brooke a look that said, "Too early," and Brooke shrugged like she'd bumped a vase she didn't plan to pick up. Uncle Greg studied his lobster. Aunt Linda suddenly found her napkin fascinating. Dad cleared his throat. The silence lasted long enough for Nathan to arrive with a fresh bottle of sparkling water and place it beside my glass, and for me to realize 2 things. First, that Nathan was the only person at this table who had poured me something without expecting anything in return, and second, that Brooke had just confirmed out loud what every single person in this room already knew. I was the mark. This whole dinner was a heist, and every lobster tail was evidence. What happened next was an accident, and I almost felt bad for Cousin Megan when it landed. She was trying to make conversation, genuinely, I think, because Megan was the one family member who'd sent me a birthday text during year 2 of the silence, a short, "thinking of you," that I'd never replied to, and still felt guilty about. "So Diana, Mom said you got a big promotion? Something about running a bunch of restaurants now?" I kept it simple. "Regional Operations Director, 4 locations." Megan nodded, impressed. "That's amazing. Like, you're in charge of all of them?" "Staffing, vendors, compliance, financials, everything from the loading dock to the check." I said it the way I'd say it in a meeting, factual, no polish. But the word financials landed on that table like a rock through a window. Aunt Linda's fork stopped. Uncle Greg looked up from his plate for the first time in 10 minutes. Brooke's scrolling thumb froze. Even Dad shifted in his chair, re-weighting, recalculating. They knew I was successful. They'd built their entire evening around the assumption that I was successful enough to pay. But hearing it, the scope, the authority, the specificity of what I actually did, was different from assuming it. They'd pictured me as a well-paid waitress who'd gotten lucky. They hadn't pictured someone who could read a P&L statement faster than they could read a menu, who managed vendor contracts worth more than their house, who knew exactly, down to the cent, what 16 lobster tails and 2 bottles of Grand Cru Bordeaux cost before the check ever arrived. The table recalibrated. I could feel it happening, like a change in barometric pressure. The power hadn't shifted yet, but it had loosened. Dad waited until dessert. He was strategic about it, I'll give him that. The soufflé had arrived, the crème brûlée was cracked, and the second bottle of Bordeaux was upside down in the ice bucket. The table was warm and full and slow with sugar and wine, and every face was soft with the particular satisfaction that comes from a meal you didn't pay for and don't intend to. Dad set down his fork. He folded his hands on the edge of the table, a gesture I'd seen him make before signing contracts, before delivering speeches at Thanksgiving, before telling me at 23 that he needed a cosigner just this once. He looked at me, not unkindly, not cruelly, with the particular expression of a man who believes he's being reasonable. "Diana," he smiled. "You're paying, right? You owe us that much." 5 words. You owe us that much. 16 people heard them. Nathan, refilling Aunt Linda's coffee behind me, heard them. The couple at the next table, pretending not to listen, heard them. My mother nodded. My sister smirked. My aunt reached for another pat of butter like the matter was settled. You owe us. 3 years of silence, and not one person at that table had said they were sorry, or that they'd been wrong, or that they'd missed me for any reason other than my credit limit. You owe us that much. I looked at my father across a table covered in the wreckage of a meal I hadn't ordered, surrounded by a family I hadn't been told was coming, holding a glass of water I'd poured myself, and I felt something I hadn't expected. Relief, because the decision I'd been afraid to make had just been made for me. I didn't answer right away. I've learned that silence does more work than words in a room full of people who are used to being agreed with. 3 seconds. 5. The kind of silence that makes a table of 16 people shift in their chairs and reach for their water glasses and suddenly remember they have something interesting to look at on the wall behind you. For 15 years, I'd paid so no one would make a scene. I'd picked up every check, co-signed every loan, covered every deposit and every dental bill and every florist invoice, because the cost of saying no was a room exactly like this one, full of staring, expecting faces, full of the unspoken understanding that Diana's love was measured in dollars and Diana's silence was purchased with compliance. 15 years, thousands of dollars, and the price of admission to my own family had just been announced to the room at roughly $80 a plate, plus wine, plus lobster, plus the particular tax that comes with being the child they only call when something needs funding. I looked at my father's hands, still folded, still steady. I looked at my mother's eyes, still warm, still performing. I looked at Brooke, who was already scrolling again because as far as she was concerned, this was decided. I looked at Nathan, standing by the service station, watching with the careful attention of a young man who knows something important is happening at his table but isn't sure what. Then I looked at my sparkling water, half full, catching the candlelight like a small, quiet promise I'd made to myself. I put my napkin on the table. I smiled. "Let me go take care of things," I said, and stood up. Mom exhaled. Aunt Linda patted her chest. Dad unfolded his hands. Every single one of them thought I was going to pay. Here's the thing, 15 years behind a host stand teaches you. The person who controls the check controls the room. My family thought they controlled it. They'd set the table, chosen the restaurant, ordered the menu, assembled the audience, and delivered the demand. They had 16 people, 2 bottles of wine, and 3 years of built-up pressure on their side. I had 2 sentences and a waiter named Nathan. If a quiet boundary has ever changed your whole life, if you've ever walked into a room where everyone expected you to fold and you didn't, hit subscribe. You'll want to see how this one lands. I didn't walk toward the front register. I walked toward the service station at the back of the dining room, where Nathan was organizing check presenters, and a floor manager named David was reviewing a ticket. David wore the standard uniform, black shirt, black tie, earpiece, and he had the look of a man who'd been in the industry long enough to handle whatever walked up to him. I walked up to him. "Excuse me, David?" He turned. Professional smile. "How can I help?" I kept my voice low. Not dramatic, not conspiratorial. Just the volume you use in the industry when you're handling something that doesn't need the dining room's attention. Nathan was beside him, listening, eyes alert, tray balanced on his hip. Both of them looked at me the way restaurant professionals look at someone who speaks their language, with immediate, precise attention. I said 2 sentences. "I'm not the host and I won't be covering this table tonight. Please bring the full check to the gentleman at the head of the table, the one whose card is already on file for the reservation." David blinked once. He glanced at Nathan, then back at me. "And the second thing? Split off just my sparkling water onto a separate check and add 30% to mine for your team." You've earned it tonight. Nathan's eyes widened slightly. David looked at me for 3 full seconds, reading the situation the way a good floor manager reads every situation, fast, thorough, without judgment. Then he nodded. Done. That was it. No argument, no hesitation, no, "Are you sure, ma'am?" Because David had been doing this long enough to know what a redirect looked like, and Nathan had been watching that table long enough to understand why one was needed. I paid my check on the spot. 1 sparkling water, 2 refills, plus a 30% tip that would be the largest Nathan had received in a month. David ran my card, handed me the receipt, and said quietly, "I'll present the table's check in about 10 minutes, once the dessert course clears." Perfect. I walked back to the table, sat down, picked up my water, and took a slow sip. Brooke was arguing with Cousin Tyler about a reality show. Aunt Linda was telling Uncle Greg about her neighbor's fence dispute. Mom was watching me with the careful attention of someone who thinks the check has been handled. Dad was leaning back, arms crossed, satisfied. 16 people, eating dessert, drinking the last of a $400 bottle of wine, waiting for a bill they had no intention of seeing. I set my glass down and waited with them. Those 10 minutes were the most peaceful of my evening. The table didn't know it yet, but the meal was over in every way that mattered. The food was eaten, the wine was gone, the ask had been made, and the answer had already been delivered in a language none of them spoke. I sat at my end and listened to my family talk. Aunt Linda complained about the cost of mulch. Uncle Greg told a fishing story that had no ending. Brooke took a selfie with the souffle remnants. Mom laughed at something Cousin Megan said. A real laugh, the kind that crinkled her eyes and made her sound, for exactly 3 seconds, like the woman who used to sing Dolly Parton in the kitchen. I almost felt something. Almost. But then I looked at Dad, who was checking his phone under the table with the tight-jawed focus of a man waiting for a text he didn't want to receive, and I remembered the message I'd read on Brooke's phone. Diana can cover us through spring. She's got more than enough. My sparkling water caught the candlelight again. I watched the bubbles rise and pop, one by one, each one a tiny implosion that nobody noticed. I thought about 17-year-old Diana in her apron, carrying 4 plates up her forearm, learning to smile through the burning in her shoulders. That girl would have paid. That girl would have pulled out her card and covered the whole table and called it love and gone home and cried in the shower and never told anyone. I wasn't that girl anymore. Nathan appeared at the edge of the alcove, and I knew, before he took his first step, exactly whose chair he was walking toward. Nathan placed the check presenter, leather-bound, embossed with the Belvedere's logo, directly in front of my father. Not in the center of the table, not near me. In front of Raymond Mayfield, the man who'd made the reservation, whose card was on file, who'd told the table to put it all on this 2 hours ago. The table conversation died like a candle in a draft. Dad stared at the leather folio for 2 seconds. I could see him processing. The check was supposed to go to Diana. The check was supposed to go to Diana. The check is in front of me. Mom's eyes went wide. She looked at me, then at the check, then at me again, and for the first time all night her composure cracked enough to show the math running behind it. Diana, she started. Dad recovered first. He was good at recovering. He'd spent 63 years never admitting he was caught off guard. He picked up the check presenter, opened it with a casual flick, and did not look at the total. He couldn't look at the total. If he looked at the total in front of 16 people, the performance would end. "I've got it," he said, pulling his credit card from his wallet with the same 2-finger flourish he'd used earlier. He handed the card to Nathan without breaking eye contact with me. "We're celebrating, remember?" Nathan took the card. "I'll be right back, sir." He said it gently, the way you say things when you know what's about to happen and the person you're talking to doesn't. Dad leaned back, crossed his arms, smiled at me with the full confidence of a man who believed his card would save him. Nathan came back in 4 minutes. He stood beside my father's chair. He leaned down and said, at a volume designed to be discreet, but heard by a table that had gone silent enough to hear ice melt, "I'm sorry, sir. The card has been declined." Nobody moved. Dad's smile held for 1 more second, a reflex, like a light that stays on after you flip the switch. Then it went out. Run it again, he said. Nathan nodded. He disappeared. He came back in 2 minutes. Same lean, same gentle voice. I'm sorry, sir. It's still not going through. Would you like to try another card? Dad reached for his wallet. His fingers moved through the slots. One card, then another, then a third he pulled from behind his driver's license like a last bullet in a chamber he'd forgotten he loaded. He handed it to Nathan. The table was silent. 16 people. No forks moving. No wine being poured. No laughter. Just the sound of Raymond Mayfield's 63 years of pride compressing into a wallet he couldn't close fast enough. Nathan came back a third time. He didn't need to speak. His face said it. Dad looked at Nathan. Then he looked at me. Not with anger. Not yet. With the raw, unguarded expression of a man who has just realized in front of every person who matters to him that the net he'd been counting on was gone, and the ground was exactly as hard as he'd always feared. He looked at me the way you look at a lifeboat that's pulling away from the ship. I picked up my sparkling water, took a sip, set it down. I don't owe you. I never did. Dad's chair scraped back against the hardwood with a sound like tearing paper. Diana. His voice was low, controlled, shaking at the edges. What did you do? I didn't do anything, Dad. Your card was declined. That's between you and your bank. You were supposed to... He stopped himself, but not fast enough. The sentence hung in the air, unfinished, visible to everyone. You were supposed to pay. Mom started crying. Not the quiet kind, the performative kind, the kind with gasps and dabbing and enough volume to recruit sympathy from adjacent tables. After everything we've done for you, after I carried you, how could you sit there and... What did you do for me, Mom? My voice was level. I didn't raise it. I didn't lean forward. I stayed in my chair with my hands around my water glass. Tell me, in front of everyone, what did you do for me in the last 3 years? Brooke slammed her hand on the table. This is so typical. You always have to make everything about you. Aunt Linda reached for my arm. Diana, dear, your father is clearly embarrassed. Can't you just... No. One word. I said it the way I'd say it to a vendor who tried to short my invoice. Clear, final, and without apology. Then Dad broke. Not with anger this time, with something worse. His voice dropped, and for one moment, one terrible, honest moment, he sounded like a man standing in a house with the lights turned off. Diana, please. We're drowning. I saw him. I saw the scared man behind the performance, the father who'd lost his business and his pride and couldn't say it out loud until his credit card said it for him. I saw him, and I ached. Then he added, "And you'd let us?" And the ache stopped. Because even drowning, he was still reaching for my wallet instead of my hand. I stood up. Not fast, not dramatic. The way you stand when you've made your decision and you don't need the room's permission to leave. Dad, I'm sorry you're struggling. I mean that. But this... I gestured at the table, the empty platters, the upside-down wine bottles, the 16 faces watching me like I was the villain in a story they'd rehearsed all week. This isn't asking for help. This is a trap. You didn't invite me to make amends. You invited me to make a payment. Mom's crying shifted into something harder. That's not fair, Diana. We just wanted you back. You wanted me back for what I could cover, Mom. I read the messages. She can cover us through spring. The table went white. Brooke's face drained. Mom's hand flew to her mouth. Dad looked at the tablecloth. If you need help, real help, I will sit down with you and a financial counselor and we will figure out a plan. No tricks, no audience, no lobster. But I'm not paying this bill. I didn't order it. I wasn't told about it. And I don't owe it to you. I don't owe you. I never did. Nobody spoke. I picked up my purse. I looked at my mother, and I said the last thing I would say to her at that table. You always told me family takes care of family, so why was I the only one who ever did? Then I walked toward the door, past the busser, past the hostess, past the heavy glass doors with the brass handles. Nathan caught me near the coat check. Ma'am? He was holding my receipt. "Thank you," he said. Quiet. Sincere. I touched his shoulder. "You're doing great," I told him again. Then I walked out. The parking lot was quiet. Thursday evening, warm air, cicadas starting up in the landscape trees that made the Belvedere look like it belonged somewhere more important than a strip mall. I sat in my car with the engine off and the window down and read the sticky note still pressed to my steering wheel. One dinner, then home. One dinner. I pulled my phone from my purse and opened the family group chat. The messages were already flooding in. Mom, Aunt Linda, Brooke, cousins I hadn't heard from in years, all of them typing at once. A cascade of exclamation points and accusations, and the particular kind of fury that only comes from people who've been caught. I didn't read them. I scrolled to the bottom, tapped Leave Group, and watched the notification confirm it. Diana has left the chat. I set the phone on the passenger seat. I started the engine, and I drove home in the same silence I'd driven there. Except this time the silence wasn't nervous. It was mine. The aftermath was quieter than I expected. No one called that night, or the next day, or the day after that. The group chat I'd left continued without me. I know because cousin Megan, the one who'd sent the birthday text, reached out separately a week later. "I just wanted you to know," she wrote, "that was the most honest thing anyone's done at a family dinner in 20 years. I'm sorry I was part of it." Megan was the only one who apologized. 3 weeks later, Brooke texted. Not to apologize. To ask if I could lend her first and last month's rent for a new apartment. I replied with the name of a financial counseling service and wished her well. She didn't respond. Through Megan, I learned the rest in pieces over the following months. Dad's contracting business had folded 18 months before the dinner. Bad bets on 2 commercial projects that went sideways. Mom had been covering minimums on 4 credit cards with a home equity line that was now maxed. The house went on the market in July. They moved to a smaller rental in a town 30 minutes south. Brooke took a job at a dentist's office answering phones. None of it was what I wanted for them. All of it was the consequence of choices they'd made long before I walked into the Belvedere, and none of it was mine to fix. I did what I'd promised at the table. I called Dad 6 weeks later and offered to sit with him and a financial counselor. He hung up. I haven't called again, but the offer still stands. I learned that the most expensive thing you can buy is other people's comfort with your silence, and the night I stopped paying for it was the night I finally got rich. That's my story. 16 seats, 1 glass of water, and a credit card that told the truth nobody else would. If you've ever been the family bank, hear me. Helping is a choice, not a debt. And a boundary doesn't have to be loud to be unbreakable. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.